My name is Henry. I'm responsible for socioeconomic development at the V&A Waterfront, and I'll be sharing with you today a case study on why compliance is important for the small businesses across our precinct. I'll start by just contextualizing who and what the V&A Waterfront is, go through a little bit about our strategy, and then I've got two fantastic amazing entrepreneurs, Helen Gibbs and Ashra Adams, joining us today. And we'll be featuring their businesses and really how they've utilized the COVID-19 pandemic to really look at alternative markets and take adversity and smash it and grow their businesses during this period as well. But before we start, let me start by giving you guys a little bit of context about who and what the V&A Waterfront is. People often recognize us as the shopping center, the Victoria Wharf, when in actual fact we a property development, a neighborhood within the city of Cape Town. We own and manage approximately 123 hectares of land with 24,000 people that live and work on the precinct every day. And we've got 800 tenants, 450 of which are small businesses in a variety of sectors. We are also the #1 destination on the continent, with 24 million people that visit the V&A Waterfront every year. And what that no doubt means is market access. And we take particular care about who gets access to that market and how we empower particularly emerging and micro enterprises to get access to that market, both in the form of consumers as well as in the supply chains across our precinct. Nominally, we're responsible for approximately 2% of the GDP across the Western Cape. That amounts to approximately 37 billion rand contribution to the economy. At the heart of what makes us who we are is job creation and economic development. Running a precinct is the joy that brings it to life, but what gives us a license to operate is going to government to say we're ready to build, we want to grow the economy. At the heart of it is job creation. We're a space that welcomes inclusivity, and we give as much care for the spaces in between the buildings as we do for the buildings themselves. The buildings account for 23% of our land mass, but those spaces in between, the 68% of our land mass, is really the reason why people visit the V&A Waterfront. And it's critical for us to ensure we put high priority to giving consumers and visitors to the waterfront on a daily basis that magical experience. We focus tremendously on breaking down barriers to access our supply chain as well as the market opportunity across our precinct. And one such example of one of the many programs we have in place across our precinct is our Joy from Africa to the World campaign. Traditionally, you would see a shopping center decked out at the end of the year with lots of tinsel and plastic and Father Christmas statues, when our marketing department really looked at what was a major procurement opportunity and looked at how we diversify that procurement opportunity. Instead of going to one major supplier who was generally importing most of the products from China, we were able to bring an additional 15 local craft and design businesses with a total of 150 crafters to access that market opportunity. At the same time, looking at the assets we have across our precinct, leveraging some of our small businesses within the craft and design sector to also take use of that opportunity in our supply chain, and in the end diverting 1.5 million rand to those small suppliers as well. But then came March 2020. We were on a fantastic upward trend, and being as exposed to the international market as we went from approximately 60 to 80,000 visitors a day right down to 3,000 visitors a day. And this impact was acutely felt by small businesses. You know, some of the big guys had the ability and the wiggle room to save, but our micro enterprises within our supply chain, micro enterprises across our precinct, are the ones who were impacted the most. Our business strategy really enabled us to think a little bit outside the box about what the principles are that guide how we're going to sort of protect those most vulnerable across our precinct. It was incredibly important for us to remain calm and protect those most vulnerable, utilizing assets across our precinct. We've got a concentration of businesses in, for instance, our Workshop 17 shared working space, working within the technology, innovation, accounting and legal practices. And we really utilize them to build some of the resilience factors into some of our small businesses in other sectors, such as the craft and design sector. People would often be surprised to know that we've got a number of informal businesses that trade across our precinct that did not necessarily have access to the relief measures put in place by government. And so it was incredibly important for us to ensure that we put those technical services, make those technical services available, and build effective measures to provide relief for small businesses. And that relief came in the form, primarily in the form of rental relief. We provided in excess of 20 million rands relief just to the small business sector. We very quickly got up and running, like many other businesses, an SME portal where we housed resources, news and information. We partnered with a number of our partners across the precinct in public and private sector to provide a whole range of webinars and partnerships. But critically, we took the bold decision to make working capital available to those SMEs, and we provided those in the form of non-interest bearing loans, with at least a 2-year payment holiday to give them a chance to regrow as the impact of this pandemic is sustained. But critically, what we're here to talk about today is that element at the bottom, the work we were able to achieve through our SME help desk. And here we were really able to leverage the relationships we have to build that resilience into the small businesses. So lots of technical services that we provided. Tax support, getting businesses compliant with SARS, registering your business. It was a fascinating insight to see how many businesses were registered, had their compensation fund clearance in place, business licenses and trading licenses. So it gave us a unique opportunity to leverage off from this pandemic and ensure that we build that resilience factor into our small businesses. I think what's critical to understand is that, and I think we all know this, is that the COVID-19 pandemic is not going to be the last serious break, economic disruption that small businesses will need to face. So it really gives us, it's heartwarming for us that we know that we're building these resilience factors into our small businesses. And the 2 examples that I'm going to talk about today, one had their compliance in place, and we'll be able to see what that enabled for Helen Gibbs, and one, Ashra, a traditional informal flower shop business, and we were able to utilize this period to get a business compliant, and we'll talk about some of the market access opportunities that came from that. I'm going to take this opportunity to welcome Helen up and ask Helen a question or two that relates to her journey during the COVID-19 pandemic. And when I spoke to Helen this week, we just talked about sort of the reality of the impact that this pandemic is still having on small businesses, and we don't want to just paint a rosy picture that Helen is out of the woods. But Helen, you have a beautiful craft studio. We see some of those beautiful designs behind you over there. You've distinguished yourself as a local and ethical sourcer. You use sustainable natural fibers and textiles. Can you just explain to us a little bit about why these principles are so important to you and how they help your business to position itself into the future?
Thank you, Henry. So basically what's happening these days is, these are catchphrases that people have caught onto: sustainability, ethics. But since 1995, when we started Helen Mellon, that is what I've built my business on. And I think that gives us a lot of traction. People are aware that our quality is amazing. So that does help you grow a business when you're strong on your ethics and you bring sustainability to the forefront, true sustainability.
Absolutely. So coming to Ashra now, and this is the really fantastic part, and when you see a business growing, Ashra's been operating Mama's Flower Shop at the V&A Waterfront since 1992 when the Vic Wharf opened. But this is an intergenerational business. She is about the third generation to take the business over, and like many businesses in the country, has run a very informal business. Ashra, you didn't have your business registered up until this year. You ran a flower shop. COVID-19 hit. Tell me about the impact that COVID has had on your business and how those support services perhaps helped you to access additional market opportunities.
Yes, Indre, as we all know, a date that we'll never forget is March 2020, when the president announced that we're going to hit level 5. Certain businesses was affected, not as heavy as the others. Some couldn't trade at all, and unfortunately, I was one of those that couldn't trade. It was devastated because the first thing that I was worried about was my workers, my children, my family. However, I was also fortunate on the other side that the community supported us because they know we've been in this trade for many, many years, because I've been at the waterfront for 30 years. And the community then supported us because it was still our funerals, it was still our weddings, our birthdays, and our new births. So people could order flowers from us. But I was devastated because I was more worried about my workers. What's going to happen to them? And then few months later, however, the waterfront management was always in contact with us, also worried about myself and my family, my workers. We came up with a plan as how to, we will still remain at the waterfront, looking at our rental and stuff like that. However, when management called me to say they would like to speak to me and support us in terms of a financial support, how we can move forward, that was a big wow to me, because now they gave me the opportunity to move forward, to support the workers more better, and it gave me opportunity to think differently, how I can structure my business differently as well. Yeah. Yes, and that was one of the key aspects. Management supported us, even though the pandemic still continued. However, we couldn't trade, and the levels dropped down till we can come back to the waterfront as well.
Yeah, Ashra, so I remember at the time you used the services of Hamida, Ideline accounting practices to get your business compliant. The business was registered. Can you share with us sort of where you are now? I know for a fact you've been able to open additional market access opportunities. What did that enable for you?
Yes, I was referred to the experts by the waterfront, where I could register my business, because I was very, very small informal business at the time, and then the experts then helped me and assist me to register my business and become more compliant, where I could then register my workers in terms of UIF and all that, get my tax clearances, because when I was approached by the spa retailers to supply them with flowers, and most of the bigger retailers prefer that your business be registered when you do supply them. And that just opened more doors for me, so that I can now supply 5 spa outlets with my proteas that I can fetch myself at the farmers as well.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Ashra. Helena, maybe just want to come back to you for a quick last question to your side. We know that mental well-being was a big challenge over this period. Ethical practices goes beyond just production and sourcing. Ethical practices goes towards how you treat people in your entity as well. Could you share a little bit about that experience and how you came through this pandemic with your staff members?
So for my staff, it was just as difficult to try and comprehend as it was for myself. I was very fortunate at that stage to have always maintained that I've got to be compliant with absolutely everything. I fear that, something dreadful could happen to us. I don't want my business to close for being, silly. So I managed to get all the funding that we could get, even though I did lose a few staff members, because they preferred to actually be at home and earn their TERS and sit at home than be at work and earn the TERS. We had difficult times, but I must just say, if we get back to how we all moved through everything. I think we did it all quite smoothly. I think those staff members are quite happy. And then the staff that have remained, we're a good team. We're getting it all back together. I think we're all going to remain positive now and work towards growth, small steps, but keep the growth going.
Great. Thank you very much, Helen. Catherine, with that, I hope I was able to give everybody just a little bit of a snapshot, 2 small case studies of what happened at quite a large scale across our precinct with approximately 400 businesses that we have an engaged relationship with. And for us, it was really an opportunity to build up, I suppose, the critical part for us is resilience into the future, and ensuring our businesses are able to survive into brighter times as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Henry, and thank you, Helen and Asha, for really bringing the human face of the supply chain to us. I think for me, there's 2 key things come out of this. Helen, it's your thing about consumer power. So you say since 1995, you've been about sustainability. It's something that's really core to your own ethics. I think what's so interesting in the world now is consumer power is really raising, and consumers are actually becoming the drivers of whether they purchase from the shop. So I think that's a very interesting key component of that discussion. And Asha, you know, as a long-time small business owner myself and working with many thousands of small businesses around the country, we all know red tape and compliance is the last thing that we really want to do. And so I love that example, that when you did get it right, it unlocked huge opportunities for growth for you. So I think thank you so much for Henry and your team for that insight. I'd like maybe to go now to our specialist panel for some comments. Tiamo Makolane, head of group procurement, risk and government at ABSA. Tiamo, what is your immediate insight? What is your immediate thought when you listen to this this case study? What do you take from this?
Heartwarming is my first word. You know, Mwagi, running a business, especially a specialized business of this nature, small and yet dependent on the customers, it's really hard. It's not an easy journey. And given the fact that the case studies that we've heard, if you draw parallels on them, you can see that their social upliftment and their social engagement with the real world showcase that they have taken into account their social responsibilities, obligations, and expectation to the market, including the waterfront, the V&A, who actually make sure that they are supported in many of those fronts. Yes, in 2020, when that lockdown bell rang, it was an unexpected disaster that could drive everyone across the board to foreclosure. But the experience and the resilience that these 2 cases have built indicate to us that where there is a will, there must be a way. To avoid disruption, make sure that you comply so that you can gain more opportunities. You know, it's that choice that the flower shop lady has made. And futuristically, looking at the growth, what are the downstream or the upstream and the downstream disruptions in the value chain? You know what? Not necessarily downsizing, but looking at the whole risk landscape and saying, I'll stop, I won't stockpile, but futuristically, I'll make sure that I issue or I sell my products in the wider variety of businesses.
Okay, thank you, Tiamo.
Yeah.
Thank you, that's great. Thanks for that insight. I'd like to go now to Lita Kuta. I'm going to call you an icon in supplier development, Lita. You're so well known, I almost think I don't need to introduce you, but basically Director of Enterprise and Supplier Development at Tiger Brands. What does this mean for you, Lita? Sustainability, ethics, how do you relate to these case studies?
Firstly, I'm a Cape Townian. I was born and grew up from Langa. So when you talk issues of transformation in the Western Cape, my home province, it really excites me because I know when I go back home every time, it's not easy. It's not an easy. So for me, Henry, really, I take my hat off. I mean, Waterfront is a destination that I grew up going in. And obviously, you see a lot of white people going in there because they've got the money to spend. And you also kind of like see a lot of white suppliers and the shops. So you almost growing this thought, where is the space for our own, Black, African, colored community, Indian communities that are in the Western Cape to participate from this 36 billion rand, a precinct that contributes 2%. So for me, the first thing and foremost is I think what Henry has done from an ethical, because issues of ethics are not just about doing the right thing from corruption, right? Because normally when we talk ethics, people think corruption, but also is about inclusiveness. How do you make sure you build an economy that is inclusive, that benefits every member of society? How does the V&A make sure that the community of the Western Cape benefits, right? Secondly, issues of local sourcing. I mean, you made an example about what you used to procure that was bought in China, and now you've localized that. That localization creates jobs for the province, right? And again, it's an ethical issue, right? In terms of, do you buy local when you can, or you do just import these things, and making that decision to make sure that you buy and you promote localization becomes very critical. The third part about it's also ethical to have a sustained supply chain, because when COVID ends, the question that I think Henry and the management are thinking, who is going to be the crafters that are going to have survived COVID? Because when people are coming back, who's going to be selling? So issues of then supporting them during that phase when there is no trade, because we all know what has happened with COVID, and the country being on lockdown, becomes not only the right thing to do, but the sustainability of the precinct itself, right? Because there will be some tourists who came 4 years ago and bought something maybe from Asha or Helena, and when they come back, when they don't see them there will be a bit of disappointment, right? So part of making sure that your product line that was there pre-COVID is also available. It talks to issues of ethics. And then the other part about ethics is not just what the V&A does, is also dealing with companies that are compliant, because there's a lot of ethics around compliance. You need companies that are paying tax, because we know as a country we are a country that's got a lot of unemployment, and we need to collect as much tax as possible, and entrepreneurs are a source of tax for the state. So getting those companies to be compliant is actually helping the fiscus, which is pretty much very important for the country. And also, I'm happy with the story that now, from what Asha was saying, is that she's able to open other markets because of the compliance. It just shows you that doing the right thing also opens up the business, expands it. It's good for her and her business, because she's going to hire more people. It's going to be good for the country, because now we'll be able to collect more taxes and be able to invest in those members of society, which we all know that are very vulnerable.
Thank you, Lita. I think I'm going to sum that up in ethics is doing the right thing. It's the right thing to do. Thank you so much for that. And I know that this is very key and very dear to your heart in the work that you do at Tiger Brand. So thank you for that lovely insight. I'm going to move on now to Lola Adekanya. So Lola is the Africa head for a very interesting organization that works globally on corruption, or anti-corruption, I suppose, anti-corruption, governance, and ethics through all spheres of society. Yes, Lola, any thoughts from you? How does doing the right thing illustrated in the waterfront translate into the rest of Africa and maybe into the globe?
Thank you very much, Kathy. This case study resonates with me so much, and I'll just start from the last thing you were saying, that ethics is doing the right thing. I want to start from there because most of the folks listening and most of us who work in corporates really work in the compliance space, right? And sometimes compliance can seem very mundane. It can feel like checking the box, and we sort of lose the connection But something happened, something important happened during the COVID-19 period. I think for those of us in the anti-corruption space, going back to the 60s and 70s, we knew that, you know, big business had lost the trust of consumers and customers. And, you know, we're trying to change that. The US passed the FCPA in '77. And it still continues to be a major discussion for us, where we say, you know, do big businesses really care about ethics? Do they really care about, you know, the small business? Do they really care about sustainability? But COVID did something. COVID shifted the paradigm for compliance officers to actually come back and realize ethics is actually doing the right thing, and not just compliance, like, you know, meeting the bare minimum of what the regulation says, but actually going the extra mile, just as Henry described they did at the waterfront. And I really want to commend, you know, the organization for going the extra mile to say, look, we have a buffer, we can survive this period if it lasts about a year, but what about the small businesses in our network? That's a value chain we need to preserve and support. And I want to sum up, you know, what compliance, ethics, and integrity should be. We should think about, you know, how we should think about it, what it should be in our minds. I think we shouldn't think about it as an end in itself. We should think about it as a means to a better life. We should think about it as a means to achieving, you know, SDG 2030 goals, the sustainability goals, or the Africa we want, the AU, Africa Union Agenda of 2063. That's the goal. And so if that's how we think about compliance, ethics, and integrity, then corporates have to start thinking like the waterfront. How can we do better? How can we not only comply with regulations? Because here, the waterfront was not thinking about, you know, making sure that they're in compliance with the tax regulations and then the new health restrictions, and you know, we're making sure everyone is wearing masks. And if they can't afford to buy the masks, then, you know, we'll have to shut down your business. That wasn't the thinking. The thinking was sustainability, development, productivity. And so Ashra's story really resonates with me, because that's why, you know, SIPE put together, you know, the resources to develop the Ethics First initiative, where we know that there are lots of informal businesses out there that can get more opportunity, become more productive, create more opportunities for job, increase their productivity if they formalize. A lot of times there's no motivation to formalize, and it was good to hear this case study about how Ashra did and benefited from it.
Thank you so much, Lola. Yes, thank you. I'm always delighted to get a global view, and yeah, thank you for those kind words too, and I second them to the waterfront as well. So maybe just the last comment then from Lisa Pierce. So Lisa is the manager of Environmental Health and Safety Unit at the IDC. Lisa, I may be particularly going to ask you on the sustainability issue. So what jumped out from this case from sustainability, ethics and sustainability?
Thank you. So I think, wow, this is a wonderful case study, and I'm so glad to hear that the V&A Waterfront has been looking at things like procurement within their buildings and their suppliers. And what resonated with me from this case study, firstly, really was the example of not buying from China, because that's the easiest thing to do, but looking at ways that they could actually procure locally. And only looking at the Christmas decorations as a first example, but I'm quite certain that has been extended or would have been extended to suppliers of food and suppliers of packaging and suppliers of waste management services. So from a sustainability perspective, I think that is really, really encouraging, and our corporates really should be looking more deeply and more innovatively for opportunities to localize their supply. And I want to maybe just also mention that we saw from IDC side during COVID, during the pandemic, how supply chains were so severely affected, because supply chains were very much global or like international or very regional, but very specifically tied to bigger regions. And then COVID disrupted that so significantly. And many organizations felt the impact of that suddenly their supplier was just not able to get the products to them, just because there were restrictions in travel and in goods being moved from one region to the next. So actually what I want to say, that sustainability, as much as we we think about sustainability and ESG factors as being a good thing to do, and it is ethical, and it is correct to think of it that way. But what we are seeing now is that it's become a hygiene factor for businesses. Business cannot operate without having these things in place anymore. And I really want to say that it stands out from the case study that having a sustainability mindset has obviously enabled the business to carry on, even with being able to be a bit creative around business model and suppliers. So I think that's definitely something to focus on, and we see sustainability as being core to business.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Lisa. Yeah, and so thank you to the panelists for your input, and thank you so much to Henry for your case study. I think it's a fantastic example of inclusive growth and really spreading the benefit through small suppliers in the region, and that makes you stand out as a retail precinct. And so, yeah, all force to you going forward. Thank you so much.